Have you ever read something so fucking stupid you were like, did I just kill brain cells reading that? That's the case with tonight's topic, because people think D&D is racist because of orcs, and somehow equate to orcs representing minorities. Welcome back, Pixel Nation Comics Division here. Wow, it's been quite some time since I've used that intro. How the hell are you? Anyway, before we get to tonight's topic, I want to thank whoever sent me this bag of coffee. It's from Black Rifle Coffee, if I can actually speak properly. Blackbeard's Delight. I want to say thank you. That is awesome of you, and I do love my coffee. Anyway, let's go and talk about how orcs are racist. Yay! We can't have fun and entertainment anymore because people are stupid on the internet. Thanks, guys. Now, if you're wondering where all this nonsense started, it was back in April of 2017 where Antero Garcia wrote this article. Now, I actually didn't read it because it cost $44 to get to it. And I'm not about to pay money for a bunch of crap that I simply just don't believe in. Anyway, the article is called Privilege, Power, and Dungeons & Dragons, How Systems Shape Racial and Gender Identities in Tabletop Role-Playing Games. Now, this is the same old song and dance we've heard before. Everything is racist, everything is sexist, and everything is homophobic. And what Garcia is arguing is that D&D fosters the distrust of the other. Because when you do that, you're able to justify doing very bad things to other people. Now, this has been covered by a number of outlets. Back in 2018, Breitbart talked about it. And then October of last year, this article was written as well. Now, quickly, I want to highlight something that this guy points out. A big part of Dungeons & Dragons is going to unpleasant places, finding unpleasant monsters, killing them, and taking their stuff. The other in this case is the monster, but this is a game. I don't know about you, but I've been playing role-playing games all of my life, and I've never once thought that, you know, Dungeons and Dragons is real, or magic is real, or orcs are real people, or that they, you know, the othering of orcs somehow applies to people in the real world. This is just completely asinine. It is a game that takes place in Imagination Land. Well, how did all this nonsense start back up again? Well, Twitter, of course. And as you can see here, the original post that I saw from Weaponized Nerd Rage is now marked private, but fear not, we have an article that goes and talks about it. Progressive nerd outlets and tabletop creators claim depictions of orcs are problematic and racist by Spencer Bakuli. I hope I said that right. Orcs, the monstrous fictional fantasy race, are once again under attack by nerd culture outlets and creators who are unable to separate fiction from reality, for failing to conform to the very specific standards of progressive politics. On April 25th, Arms and Tide podcast host Quinn Welsh Wilson asserted their disgust and shock at the in-game depictions of a role-playing game as an orc found in the 5th edition of Dungeons & Dragons, claiming that the language used was blatant racism. CW, blanket racism. I'm in genuine awe that this shit came out of this edition of D&D, holy shit. And what this individual is mad about is the role-playing and orc section of Dungeons & Dragons. I believe this is the Volo's guide that this is a snippet from. Most orcs have been indoctrinated into a life of destruction and slaughter, but unlike creatures who by their very natures are evil, such as gnolls, it is possible that an orc, if raised outside its culture, could develop a limited capacity for empathy, love, and compassion. No matter how domesticated an orc might seem, its bloodlust flows just beneath the surface. With its instinctive love of battle and the desire to prove its strength, an orc trying to live within the confines of civilization is faced with a difficult task. Now, if you go and read this passage and immediately jump to the conclusion that this somehow applies to minorities in the real world, maybe you're the one who's the fucking racist. Out of all my years of playing role-playing games, I've never taken something like this and thought it applied to people in the real world. An orc is a fantasy monster. It doesn't exist. It's not based on real people. Welsh Wilson quickly received a wave of backlash from fantasy fans who argued that not only are orcs first conceptualized by J.R.R. Tolkien in his famous Lord of the Rings series, a fictional race, and are not based on real-world minorities, but that Welsh Wilson's assertion was itself racist for assuming that these depictions were being used in a reference to non-white races. Now, I by no means am an expert on Tolkien, but what I do know is that orcs, the original orcs, are elves that were twisted and became evil and corrupted, and that the Uruk-hai were manufactured from mud. 1000 Jutsu points out that, are orcs racist? He explicitly based them on the stereotype of the Mongolian horde, but not on actual Mongols. And that makes sense. The Mongol horde was very ferocious. I mean, just go and ask the Chinese during that time period, and they'd say that the Mongols were evil and terrible people. Hell, they built a whole big fucking wall to keep them out of China. But still, this is just a role-playing game, and you can draw inspiration from a lot of things. And one thing that I always thought of was actually the Germanic barbarian tribes. And this is where they bring things to colonization. After initially asking their critics to please learn how to read text, whatever the fuck that means, just basic media analysis stuff, Welsh Wilson would later explain that their statement was about language used by colonizers to justify colonial violence, stating that they were attempting to point out parallels in the rhetoric and language in descriptions to orcs, to language historically used to dehumanize people and justify colonial violence. I'm gonna say this only one time. Dungeons & Dragons has absolutely fuck all to do with colonialism, you dumb shit. What I did was point out the parallels in rhetoric and language in describing orcs to the language historically used to dehumanize people and justify colonial violence. There is a huge difference between that and I think black people and Latinos are orcs. And it doesn't just stop there. They're also saying that the mechanics of the game is also racist itself. This is coming from comicbook.com. Dungeons & Dragons and many other fantasy games tend to describe races as monolithic entities that all share the same physical characteristics and cultural beliefs. This is reflected both in the racial attribute score bonuses that each race gets in Dungeons & Dragons, as well as how they are described in the passages like the one criticized by Welsh Wilson. Many people see games like Dungeons & Dragons as codifying and normalizing the use of racial stereotypes, which leads to both racist situations in the gaming table and encourages racist attitudes getting adopted by some players. What the actual fuck? Orcs are a species of humanoid. When they say race in D&D, they really mean species. This whole thing gets very confusing when you start trying to use real-world terms like race, the physical difference between humans in our world and a species in another world. And again, this is just fluff. It's used to basically describe what these monsters are like, or what these humanoids are like. This isn't racial science, you morons. For instance, a player using the orc race found in Volo's Guide to Monsters means that they take a -1 penalty to their intelligence score, which means that the smartest level 1 orc will always be less intelligent than the smartest level 1 human. When translated to the real-world discussion about races and cultures, it can be easily argued that this pushes an incredibly racist and outdated viewpoint. A real-world and outdated viewpoint of orcs, a species that isn't real in any form or fashion? Are you fucking kidding? This is stupid. Nobody says this. Nobody goes and applies the same logic to people in the real world. Of course, the common other side to all this is that orcs, dwarves, elves, and other fantasy races aren't real, and they aren't meant to be representative of human cultures or races. Bingo! You fucking nailed it on the head! But the very nature of Dungeons & Dragons as a game blurs the lines between reality and fantasy. I just can't. This is so fucking retarded. Do I really need to point out to you that this isn't real? Yeah, you assume a character in a fictional setting that isn't real, and you roleplay that character, but that's still fantasy. It's not real. You are not interacting or hurting real people. Why am I explaining this to you? While you are meant to step into a fictional character's role in Dungeons & Dragons, it still gives agency to the player by assuming that a character is both unique and is capable of making its own decisions. It's still not real. And thus it is problematic to assume that a creature with both self-awareness and intelligence will act a certain way simply because they come from a certain culture or look a certain way. It's still not real. This is fiction. And honestly, it's up to the DM and how they want to fucking run things. While Dungeons & Dragons and wider fantasy genre has often struggled with these monolithic stereotypes, the other thing too is that these idiots don't understand that the medieval world in this time period was a very monolithic culture. Pretty much. It's not like today, and they're trying to judge it by today's standards. And that doesn't fucking apply. We have a lot more variety now than we did in the Middle Ages. And that's the thing that these people don't get. And it's also the reason why these creatures, these monsters, these fantasy humanoids are set up that way as well. It doesn't mean you can't have variety, but on average, this is how humans are, this is how orcs are, and this is how elves are. It's just a fucking game. It should be noted that 2 of the Dungeons & Dragons more recent sourcebooks have offered players alternative rules for orcs that don't require them to make racial penalties to intelligence and don't have a natural bloodlust for underlying rage. Holy fucking shit. These are just game mechanics. And this is stuff that the DMs could have changed all along if they were so inclined. This is just so asinine. It makes my head hurt that you are equating something that isn't real to people in the real world, saying that this is the same as race science. It's not, you fucking idiots. It's fantasy. But while these options remain, this weekend's discussion shows that there is still much more progress needed. In what? Orc-human relations? Seriously, I don't get these people. I don't get where they're coming from. This is not real. Oh my god, it makes my fucking soul hurt. And it makes me so angry that people are this fucking stupid. Anyway, that's all I got, folks, so I'll catch you next time. Holy shit, you made it all the way to the end of the video. Well, since you're here, you might as well do me a small favor. If you're new to the channel, go and click that subscribe button, bash that bell for notifications, make sure to like the video if you enjoyed the content, and also share it on social media. I even have a P.O. box in case you want to go and send me fan mail. I never get any, so you could actually be the first one. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all my Subscribe Star supporters. Without you, I would probably still be doing this. But in all seriousness, thank you very much, and I do appreciate the support. And I want to give a huge shout out to Toxic Manflu for joining the well hello there big spender tier, as well as Satakur 7th Legion for joining the Take My Money Damn It tier. You guys are awesome.